What do you call your grandfather?
Well, I call him deceased, but...
Well, what did you... Well, I hope they don't call me that yet.
I call him Grandpa.
Okay. You step into it, you don't know, you don't know what you're going to get, right?
Especially with Brant.
I know. Well, I was going to this. My grandsons call me D2, so, as a junior. Listen, guys, I really appreciate you being out here. This is a difficult time in our country, and honestly, it's going to take people just like us to make a difference. My message today is not really upbeat. I'm going to leave you with some hope because that's what we are all about today. If you didn't have hope, you wouldn't be here. I'm going to spend just a few minutes and talk about three things today, very briefly. The first is, my message is very simple. We are in the middle of a full-blown financial and economic crisis in America. This debt is overwhelming, it's unmanageable. Number two is I believe that career politicians are guilty of negligence. I think they are responsible for this mess. And three, I think it's time to try some new people in Washington. Very simple. The debt, $17 trillion we all know about. What we're not talking about, there are a couple of us in this campaign, I was the first to actually call it out. You do some research, we have $86 trillion of future unfunded liabilities by the federal government. Good morning, come in. That's Social Security, Medicare, and pension and benefits for federal employees. It's over $1 million a household, ladies and gentlemen. And 4 months ago, I had the opportunity to have dinner with 4 past secretaries of defense, and they all agree that the number one threat to our national security is not Iran, not Al-Qaeda, not Iraq, it's our debt. You remember in the 80s, we bankrupted the Soviet Union on the strength of our economy and the power of our ideas. Now we're doing the same darn thing to us by our own foolishness. There's just no reason for it. And what are we getting for all that? You know that today 1 in 5 Americans is either unemployed or underemployed, okay? And 80% or more of all the jobs created this year are part-time jobs. The Fed just put $3.5 trillion in the economy. Look what it's getting us. Nothing, okay? It's the longest period of sustained high unemployment since World War II. There's a reason for that. But who's responsible for this mess? Well, I guess I am. But then I think you are too. And that may be why we're here, because we keep putting the same people up there expecting different results. Einstein called that insanity. Do you realize today that 36 United States senators have been in elected office in Washington for over 30 years? In this race, I'm running against 4 professional politicians who have been elected office 63 years, who've run for office 39 times. And that wouldn't be so bad, but in the United States Senate, only 10 people have any business experience. And yet they make the rules for the rest of us out here in small business, large business, and they have very little understanding of what happens in the free enterprise system when some of the rules they put in place come to us. Obamacare is a perfect example. I had a perfectly good personal health insurance plan with Blue Cross Blue Shield. My friends in Washington decided I wasn't smart enough to know what was good for me, and they canceled it. And my cost to get the new policy, okay, I now have to have maternity. Now my wife's about my age, and she's not Sarah. We don't need maternity. But it just makes you mad when it hits home like that. Look, if we want different results in Washington, we need to send a different kind of person to Washington. You've heard my background. I've had 41 years in business. At Dollar General, I was very blessed to come into a situation. It was a very tough situation. They'd been number 1 in the world. Nike had come in behind Michael Jordan, and all of a sudden they were on the verge of bankruptcy. And we took that stock from 7 to 59 in 4 years on the back of a couple of things. We actually negotiated a revolutionary deal with the NFL, NBA, and NHL, fundamentally blocking Nike out of those leagues for 10 years. They just got back in last year. And we ended up selling it to one of our major competitors, Adidas, for $59. At Dollar General, they had been under investigation by the SEC. The SEC, it was the largest restatement in U.S. history prior to WorldCom, Tyco, and Enron. And it was a 3rd-generation family business. It was public. I was invited to come in. They did a search, and I was asked to come in as the first non-family CEO of that company. It was a great company, a great mission. Their purpose in life is to help people get from payday to payday. And they did it. Some of you ladies may have been in 1 or 2 Dollar Generals in Georgia. I think we might have 1 or 2. I'm not sure. We're building about somewhere between 600 and 700 a year, I think, right now. I mean, it's a great model in American economic history because it has a mission and stuck to it. And we turned that company around, and it's gone on to do great things. I'm very proud of them. They continue to grow. Look, this race is going to be very simple. If you like what's going on in Washington, you've got 4 people with political careers. I just said they've been in office 63 years. If you like what's going on, they're the professionals, the traditional choices. I just looked at the field and said, I just don't think they're going to make a difference. If they were, they would have already done it. The 10 people in the United States Senate who have any business experience, I've talked to 3 of them. And they say if I get elected, I'll go into the United States Senate with more business experience than anybody else in the Senate. Now guys, I've had a nice career, but that's ridiculous. There are 57 attorneys in the United States Senate today. 5 people have ever run a business, small businesses. I'm running a little small business right now. I know what the 50 employee limit looks like. I know what the cost of Obamacare looks like. More importantly, I suffered through Sarbanes-Oxley. Okay? I know what Dodd-Frank's going to do to us, what it's already doing. You know that Dodd-Frank's only got 40%, it's only 40% implemented right now. The consumer protection part of that hadn't even been implemented yet. We have over 6, let me give you just a couple of tidbits of hope, and I'm going to finish and take a couple of questions. This economy is waiting to bust out. It took us 17 years to get this port approved by the EPA down here in Savannah. Now, guys, we've been digging in that port since Oglethorpe. That's ridiculous, okay? That port is an economic engine for this state, this region, and this country, and it took us 17 years to get it deep in 5 feet. We still don't have the money to do it yet. If you look at the economy of the United States right now, it's going nowhere. Real growth is under 1%. Real growth. I'm not talking about government growth. I'm talking about real economic growth out here where you and I live. But let me tell you, there's $6 trillion not at play in this economy because of bad regulatory policy in the United States, bad tax policy and bad regulatory policy. There are $2 trillion offshore in U.S. profits because we are the only country in the world that double tax our repatriated profits. We have $2 trillion of excess reserves on our banks because of Washington. We don't need that. 85% of the banks are not levered up like the big banks in New York were that needed that extra risk protection. The largest companies in the country have over $2 trillion right now, not at work. Why? It's on their balance sheets because of the uncertainty in Washington. I'm on Alliant Energy's board, it's a utility board up in Wisconsin. And it took us 14 years to get 2 power plants approved by the EPA. They came back and rescinded the approval, and now they've killed coal. This president is running this government on presidential order and regulatory oversight. He couldn't get cap and trade passed in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, so he turned around and told the EPA to kill coal, and they did within a year. Guess where their headlights are directed now? Natural gas. God has given us a natural resource economic boom if we would just step up and take advantage of it. It could fuel us into the next century. It's the economic trigger if we could get the regulatory policies just to have some common sense. They've debated this pipeline. We have over 80 pipelines in the United States. What's the importance of this extra pipeline? It's just the principle of it. They don't want to give in to any part of this. Look, I just think that you have to look back at history. We've done this once before. We were in the ditch in the 80s, in the 70s. One of my first mortgages was double ditch, a double digits interest rate. I tell my kids that and they think I'm lying. How many of you here had a double digits interest rate? Yeah, see that? We remember, right? You only have to pay that once to never forget it. Ronald Reagan asked a question in 1980. Remember what he asked? Anybody? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago, right? Well, we weren't. I have a different question today. Are our kids and grandkids going to be better off than we are? Unfortunately, the answer is we're the first generation, my generation. The children of the great generation is the first generation that has to say no to that question, and that's unbelievable to me. It's unconscionable. It's unacceptable. Frankly, in my opinion, the reason I'm in this race is I think we need people in Washington who care more about the next generation than they do the next election. I could go on for an hour, guys, but I want to be careful with the time. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Karen. I'll take a couple of questions, and I apologize. I'm going to have to run out, help take care of my mother-in-law this morning. But I would love to meet you guys at a later date and come back and do that.
Question right there. Oh, gentlemen, go ahead.
I noticed in your brochure a mention of tax reform. Give us a quick synopsis of what your idea is.
Well, I have two words. I mean, we could debate this all day. It's the worst system that's ever been invented. Fair tax is what I would support to get us out of the ditch. I mean, I have some personal preferences, but that's on the table, and that's the best one that's out there right now. Yes, sir.
For those of us who don't know, tell us a brief history of your politics. You're entering into politics.
Oh yeah,
Have you been involved at all?
that'll be real quick. You're looking at it. We started in this July 24th. Before then, I had never thought about running for office. I took a couple months and did an exploratory campaign around the state, traveled around, talked to people, and decided that we needed a business person alternative. My role in this thing is to give us an alternative. We've got the traditional candidates. They're decent people. They're great people. I'd love to have any one of them as my neighbor. So I'm giving you another alternative to the traditional choice that we normally have. Hey, Jan.
I just would like to know, do you have a stand on the con-con?
On the what?
On the con-con.
Constitutional Amendment Convention under Article 5.
Well, first of all, I believe our founders got it right. The second thing is I believe we have altered, first of all, it's being trashed today. Let me just put it that way. When Barney Frank stands up in his retirement in the floor of the House and says, you know, this career I had as a representative turned into be a pretty lucrative career, it tells you that we have gotten away from the principles that the founders had. I fully support going back to the basics. I don't see education in the Constitution. Okay, that tells you where I stand on local control. I don't see, you know, the Second Amendment's in there for a purpose, all right? But the bigger issue in my mind is it never saw the regulatory arm up there. It never saw people going up there and spending 30 years. We have 36 U.S. senators who've been up there in Washington for over 30 years. They're not part of us anymore. They're part of the problem. David?
Would you be the kind of senator that would use my money to deepen the port in Savannah, or would you ask the companies that actually use the port?
Well, I think it takes both, and here's why. I think, number one, the problem in the state right now is we've used taxpayer dollars to incent these companies to come here and bring jobs, all right? I think that's a little bit artificial. I think jobs can be attracted. If you look at the basics of building an economic growth platform, it's educated workforce, okay? It's infrastructure, it's water, it's cheap power. These are the fundamentals that we take for granted. I don't believe that you should just let the free companies come here. And by the way, same thing with employees. I look at the public companies in America get a free pass. It's like the NFL. The NFL doesn't have to pay for a minor league, right? Like baseball. Baseball pays for its own athletes to come through a minor league program. What does the NFL do? They get them free, right? From where? Colleges. I look at the companies coming to Georgia the same way. And they do pay, you know, they do pay for that over time. But the big money right now comes from the federal government. Yes?
You talked about, obviously, a lot of senators up there have been there way too long. I'd agree with you. How would you advocate your service? Mike, you're going to serve.
Yeah.
Do you think you should serve 1, 2 terms?
I believe fully in term limits. There's a bill before the Senate. It's been there since 2010. Two in the Senate, 3 in the House, and frankly, in my opinion, no double dipping. Not 6 in the House and then 12 in the Senate. I think that's where we got off track. Right now, it's a career path. You get elected in the State House, you move to Washington, the U.S. House, and then you want promoted over to the Senate.
Do you think you'll have a chance of that?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Here's the problem. I can't go to Washington and tell you I'm going to get a vote in the U.S. Senate as long as it's democratically controlled and we have a Democratic president. So we have 2 choices. One, win the Senate. And by the way, we have a choice. If you look at how bad Dodd-Frank is, and if that comes out this year, and I believe what you're going to see in the latter part of this year, you're going to see the insurance companies begging for a bailout behind Obamacare. And you're going to see a number of, there are 5 million people right now canceled, their insurance canceled. I'm one of them. Only 2 million have signed up for Obamacare. Well, that's 3 million people. You think they're happy? You think I was happy? I mean, the point is, I think you got to take it to the states. I think you have to have a senator stand up and take a chance of not getting reelected to call this out and call out why it's bad. Did you know that 36 senators have been up there 30 years? I didn't. They don't tell us that. We've changed rules that were just that onerous before with an outcry from the grassroots out here, and that's what I'm going up there. I'm going up there to do 2 things. I'm going to fight for term limits. I'm going to fight to get this economy going because we can't solve this debt crisis, guys, unless you get the economy going. You can't cut enough. You can't raise taxes enough. The math doesn't work. It's not complicated, but you got to get this $16 trillion economy going. And very few people up there know how to do it, or they would have already done it. Look, we just passed a Ryan bill, right? You know what it did? $20 billion in cuts over 2 years. That's $10 billion. We have a problem that's 100 times greater than that. 100. And they're beating their chest because they did us a great favor. I'm sorry. This thing is over the edge. We can't, there's not enough capital in the world to continue to finance this debt, y'all. I mean, there's just not. Sorry, I got one more?
Yeah,
Okay.
we got a couple of written questions that submitted as well.
While y'all are thinking of another question, here's a question was submitted. If a bill was before the Senate similar to Obamacare, NSA Empowerment Act, or a new Patriot Act, something like that, which you would come to the conclusion based on advice and your own beliefs that it was unconstitutional. You would come to the conclusion it was unconstitutional, but the bill was supported by the majority of both your colleagues and constituents. Would you vote for it or against it?
I'd vote against it. Here's why. I'm not going up there to have a career. I've had a career. I don't need a legacy. I've got a legacy. I don't need an entourage. I've had entourages. I don't need to know the best restaurant in Georgetown. I've been there, okay? That's not why I'm going there. I'm going there for one reason, that's to make a difference, not to make friends.
Nancy?
Well, if you were elected, would you have the ability to go across the aisle and talk to those people and actually convince them that what you've got to say will work?
That's a great question. We've got gridlock up there, and we've had it for 13 years because we're debating tax increases on the Democrat side and spending cuts on our side, right? Nothing's going to happen with gridlock. And I'm ready to tell people, what they're missing up there is leadership on the economic side. Nobody's given them an alternative of how to get the economy going and how bad these regulations are. Why? Because only 5 people have ever run a business, only 10 have ever been in the free enterprise system. I keep saying that because it's overpowering how ridiculous that is. They don't know. If they I talked to Ron Johnson about that very point, because before I got in here I said, look, I don't want to do this. I don't want to waste time. I don't waste money. This is not an easy process. I hate it, frankly. But I'm doing it because I think I can make a difference. And Ron Johnson said, if you're willing to lead, you will have the experience that people will listen to you. But you can't get anything done in Washington unless you influence people. Give me an example. We have $480 billion right now in redundant agencies. Y'all realize that? That's half our debt. Redundant, not similar, redundant. Now you tell me that if you bring that up and start screaming about that from the bully pulpit, that you can't get a few Democrats to come in and amend some of these things to get rid of some of this. Dodd-Frank's another one. You're not going to repeal Dodd-Frank in the immediate future, but you can certainly amend it to free up this cash on the local banks. It's just, I mean, anybody would look at that. It's common sense. Let me give you another one. This tax, the double tax on repatriated profits, they're not getting any revenue right now from it, but they won't change it because nobody's taking it up to change that. That's $2 trillion that come flowing back into our country to be invested right here instead of invested over there. You don't hear this from anybody in Washington or frankly anybody in this race because nobody's got this depth of experience. But again, you have the choice. You're going to see traditional politicians and you're going to see an outside candidate with some business experience. Great question.
We got a couple more written questions, unless someone has one just on the tip of their tongue. We got about 5-10 more minutes for questions. This question is
for me. Boy, I talk too quick then.
Name a political leader or philosopher and/or political book like Conscience of a Conservative, Liberty and Tyranny, something like that, which has influenced you in the development of your political philosophy.
Well, look, I grew up a conservative. My parents were teachers. My dad was a superintendent who had to fight for federal dollars because it was a federally impacted Air Force base in Warner Robins, okay? And I know the pressure they went under in terms of fighting that pressure from the federal government. Ronald Reagan is a guy that I look to because he came in, he cited facts, he was an outsider, he had been a governor, he had been through all the legislative nonsense, and he led. He didn't have the best solution. If we sat around and debated what he did, we might still be in a depression, okay? What we did is we got behind him because he was a leader. That's number one. Number two, I think Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago has influenced my life to be right here where I am today. And if you think it can't happen here, this is a guy who was a writer in the Soviet Union who was imprisoned in their gulags for 30, 40 years, all right? And he wrote this book. It's the hardest book I've ever had to read. But it was sobering because it can happen here, y'all. I'm telling you, we bankrupted them in the 80s. It took 30 years to do it because of our economy and our ideas. But we're doing the same thing to ourselves right now. And I think those two really influenced me to go the opposite way and be aware that these things are possible, even to us. You think the dollar that we're granted, the dollar is a reserve currency forever? No, we earned that right 100 years ago. We could lose that in a blink of an eye. So I don't take any of our freedom for granted. I don't take our Constitution for granted. I don't take the fact that we're here on a Saturday morning giving up our time on a rainy morning to hear people to go make a change. I don't care who you send, but make sure you send somebody that you believe will really make a change. Don't send somebody to just keep the status quo. That's not acceptable, and you know it. That's why you're here.
We had one more question submitted, similar to what you've already discussed. Name a U.S. senator or senators currently serving or previously served who you would seek to emulate.
Whew. Wow, how far back do you want to go? Oh, geez. I think Baker from Tennessee was a statesman. You know, I only met him once. If you look at today, I'm going to give you two names. I don't agree with everything both these guys are doing, and they're totally different. You're going to be shocked with one of them. I think Ted Cruz is up there trying to do the right thing. He did it late. That's the only thing I disagree with. If he'd gotten up there in the first week, started filibustering and doing everything he did 2 weeks before the deadline, I'd have been right there with him. I'd have been there with him anyway. But the other guy is Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson has a bill before the Senate right now to delay the individual mandate, and I certainly support that. In fact, I think we ought to legislate what the president's already done partly, and that is to give us 2 years. Get out to January 17, get rid of this guy, and then let's see what we can do. This is nonsense. It's going to crash and burn around our ears. But those are the two guys, I think, you know, three guys that I'm watching right now. I know a few others, but I think Ron Johnson's a freshman senator. He's very genuine. He's not up there to get reelected, and I think Ted Cruz is all over calling out the nonsense up there, and we need more people doing that. Whether you agree with him in detail or not, I don't care. He's calling out the problem, and that's what I'm doing today.
Any more questions for David? Oh,
sorry.
When you go up there, you talked about, you know, making a stand on an issue if you believed in it. But there's got to be a compromise up there. Surely you're willing to
Absolutely.
compromise
Well,
with your beliefs and get to
this
the
is
player and
you're right.
betterments, everything.
Thank you. That's a great point. I hope you don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Look, I was a CEO. People say, well, you're a CEO, you got to do what you want. That's far from the truth. You have to manage employees, customers, you know, store managers, investors, bankers, analysts. You negotiate and you manage all the interests that you're working with. Now, you don't give up your principles, because if you did, you wouldn't last very long in that environment. It's a tough environment. You have to earn your revenue. You don't just tax people and get revenue to spend. Okay, that's what everybody else in this race has done. Generating real revenue teaches you how to collaborate without giving away your principles. The problem with the Republican Party says, well, wait a minute, you talk to anybody on the other side, that means you're giving up away your principles. If you're ready to lead on an issue, I'm not going to go up there and tell you I'm going to repeal Dodd-Frank. I will tell you I'll go fight to amend it. And to do that, I think I can find some Democratic senators who will join in with logic and be led into a reasonable solution. That's the only way out of this box, frankly. This gridlock's not working. We've proven that. And just saying no doesn't work either, by the way. Thank you. Guys, thank you very much. I apologize for having to run out. I really appreciate it.